Good morning. Today is Tuesday, August 1st, 2023. This is a poem by Tagore. And because I love this life, I know I shall love death as well. The child cries out when from the right breast the mother takes it away, in the very next moment to find in the left one its consolation. When we encounter death, there are two themes, two goals we try to reach, two parties who need our attention. There is kavod hames, honor to the deceased, and there is nichum avelim, helping, assisting, comforting the mourner. The first, kavod hames, the emphasis is on the deceased. And the second, nichum avelim, the emphasis is on the mourners and their needs, their support through the process of gradual consolation. Now, these two overlap and are always both applicable, but in terms of primacy, there is a shift. Immediately after death, the first principle is kavod hames, honor to the deceased. We discussed this before, the status that the mourners have from the moment of death until the end of the funeral. They're called an onain. That is due to setting everything aside to prepare for the funeral. That's because of kavod hames, to show honor and respect to the person that passed away. The funeral preparations, the decisions about the funeral, we discussed this before, all relate to kavod hames. What is the greatest honor to the deceased? The hespedim, the eulogies, the words of tribute that are said. Again, honor to the deceased. And the funeral itself, the service itself, the prayers, the actions, all of these are designed for kavod hames, honor to the deceased. The term that the Talmud uses is yikra d'shechvi, the honor due to the one that passed away. And then comes Shiva, which we will discuss in a moment, and the rest of the stages of mourning, where the emphasis is on the mourner. Yikra d'chaye, the honor, the needs of those who are living, the survivors, the mourners, in ways that we will see today and in the coming days. And that's how I understand this poem by Tagore. And because I love this life, I know I shall love death as well. The child cries out when from the right breast the mother takes it away, in the very next moment to find in the left one its consolation. The demarcation between honor to the deceased and care for the mourners is known in the Talmud as stimas hagolel, the filling of the grave. When at the funeral service, the grave is filled all the way to the top, this is the moment that creates the shift, that ends the period of being an onain. Remember, an onain, someone who has just lost an immediate family member, God forbid, up until the funeral, is not allowed to perform any positive mitzvahs, including prayer. So the onain has only been concerned with the honor due to the deceased. At the moment that the funeral is completed and the grave is completely filled, that's when the person is no longer an onain, but an avel, a mourner. And they start the period of Shiva, of a 7-day period of mourning, which we're going to discuss, and it's that moment that allows Kaddish to be said. The Kaddish that is said at the graveside is said at that moment because that is the moment when the grave is filled, that the person is no longer an onain, now is allowed to say prayers. While the person was an onain, prayers are not permitted. Even Kaddish is not permitted. Once the Shiva period starts at the graveside, Kaddish can be said. And as we discussed a few weeks ago, this graveside Kaddish is a special form of the Kaddish. It includes a reference to Tchiyat HaMesim, to the resurrection of the dead, to the fact that those who pass away, their soul, their neshama remains alive and connected to God, and at some point their soul and bodies will be brought back to life at some future time. Death is, in other words, a stage, one of several stages of life. And so this itself is one very early beginning of the nechama practice, nechama process. This is the signal for the moment of the shift in emphasis to the mourners, to their care, their grief, and gradually, ultimately, we hope, their consolation. Now, as I implied before, technically, Kaddish cannot be said, and the funeral attendees cannot leave until the grave is full, because until then, the person is unburied. The mitzvah of burial has not been completed, and the mourners are still in the category of onain until that happens. This has become a problem in many of our circles where, for various reasons, there is a desire at the graveside to end the service earlier before the grave is fully filled, to say Kaddish, and to leave. There are several reasons for this. Some of them are legitimate, some of them are not legitimate. A full discussion of this topic is not for now, other than to say it is a problem. Our practice at ADATH, for any funeral in which we are involved, is that either Rabbi Alex or I always stay until the grave is completely filled. We stay until our job is completed, until the mitzvah of burial is completed. Shiva means 7. And it refers to 7 days, a mourning period of 7 days. It's actually 5 full days and 2 partial days. The day of the funeral is called day number 1. The morning of the 7th day is called day number 7. So Shiva ends the morning of the 7th day. Why 7? The Rav, Rabbi Yosef Soloveitchik, suggests something very deep. He quotes the language of the Rambam, Maimonides, in codifying this law. The Rambam writes, Moshe Tikain. Moshe, of course, received the Torah from God and taught it to the Jewish people, but Moshe was also the first rabbinic legislator. Moshe introduced certain legislation on his own as the head of the Sanhedrin, the head of his court. That was not biblical law. He didn't hear it from God. It was rabbinic law. So Moshe Tikain, it is a rabbinic legislation, a rabbinic practice legislated by Moshe that a bride and groom who marry for the first time, they celebrate for 7 days, Sheva brachot, 7 blessings over the course of 7 days, and Shiva, and a 7-day period of mourning. The Rav asked, why is it that the Rambam places these 2 pieces of legislation together as if it's the same piece of legislation? The 2 subjects could not be further apart. One is death, one is the beginning of life and marriage. One is sad, the other is joyous. How does the Rambam connect these 2? And the Rav said, because both of these institutions deal with the same existential truth, the same existential loneliness and dread that each of us faces in life. One legislation celebrates overcoming that existential loneliness through marriage, and the other, 7 days of mourning, the Shiva, helps us to deal with the pain of loneliness and suffering. During Shiva, the mourners, the immediate family relatives, stay in the home of the deceased for the 7 days. That home is enveloped in an aura of the one who passed away. Physically, there may be items and photos and all kinds of things that remind us of the person who lived in this place. And also spiritually, our Kabbalistic scholars indicate that there's a certain sense in which the spirit of the person is somehow connected to his or her home during the Shiva period. It's a very special thing to arrange a minyan, to daven, to have prayer services in the home where Shiva is being observed. One, so that mourners don't have to go out. They want to be able to say Kaddish prayer, so the minyan comes to them instead of them having to go out. Of course, if there is no minyan in the house, they are invited to come to the synagogue. It's a legitimate reason to leave the house to be able to attend services to say Kaddish. And the other is to provide a spiritual nachas ruach, a pleasure, a satisfaction to the soul of the deceased, who again, as I mentioned, is somehow present and sees that they are praying in my place, in my home. And this applies, by the way, even if there are no mourners. Even if there are no mourners, there is still the right practice to arrange a minyan in the home of the person that passed away, if it is possible. It's not always possible to arrange Shiva to be observed in the home of the person that passed away for various reasons, and today it's become more frequent that there are reasons that it is either impossible or improbable, impractical, or inconvenient. And so other arrangements have to be made, but it is the ideal. And if it is not, if it is in another place, first of all, like a room in the building, and, I can't help the irony of so many buildings who call this their party room, and Shiva's observed there. It certainly lacks a certain atmosphere of what Shiva should be all too often. Or in the home of one of the other relatives, perhaps a child, perhaps a sibling. It still fulfills the mitzvah, but it's not as evocative. It's not the same. It's not really the ideal way to do it. If it's at all possible to do it in the home of the person that passed away, that is ideal. The essence of Shiva, and I'm going to come back to this over and over, is confrontation, confronting death, confronting loss, confronting grief and regret and anger and relief that is controlled and structured with support. That's the essence. We want to express all of these emotions, but we want there to be support and structure. The first statement that sitting Shiva means is don't go back to work right away. Don't act like nothing happened. That lacks kavod hames. That shows a lack of honor to the deceased. Sitting Shiva says, this is a big deal. My life is different. Something drastic has changed. Life is interrupted. It's put on hold. Whatever I had to do, put on hold. There are exemptions, exceptions, very limited. That should be discussed on a case-by-case basis. But Shiva encourages that we should also just not stay in bed all day, which is what many of us may feel like doing. I can remember days after my father passed away, there were days where I felt like I just wanted to stay in bed under the covers. So what Shiva does by having a family gather, by having friends and relatives come to visit. It is a balance of confrontation and structure. It's detailed, as we will see. It is subtle, and it is highly, highly therapeutic. Many people know a lot of the details of observing Shiva. You can read about it in books. I'd like to focus on some of the less known practices, those especially that help set the mood and the purpose of Shiva. So the first thing is, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about this, Shiva is 7 days, 5 full days and the partial day at either end. It's around the clock. Shiva, mourners are in Shiva at all of the hours, wherever they are. If they go home at night, if they're traveling, they are in Shiva 24/7. It's common today, and it's not a bad idea, to offer hours when people are asked to come visit, 2 to 4, 7 to 9, and that makes it convenient because the mourners do have to eat meals, they do have to rest. We don't want people to come too early, we don't want people to come too late, especially if a mourner is not so well themselves. But that doesn't mean, and this is the mistake that people may make, Shiva is 2 to 4 and 7 to 9. No. Shiva is 24 hours a day. You're asked to visit between the hours of 2 to 4 and 7 to 9 because it's more comfortable, more convenient for the mourners. But the obligation of the mourners to act in accordance with the practices of mourning, that applies all hours. So even if one of the mourners goes home at night to sleep, which is okay, in their own house, in the morning, at nighttime, when they wake up, when they go to bed, they are still in Shiva. So all of the practices of mourning, covering the mirrors, sitting in a low chair, applies wherever they are during those hours. It is not that I come to the place where the Shiva is being held, and from 2 to 4 and 7 to 9, that is when I am in Shiva. No, Shiva is comprehensive. When the mourners come back from the cemetery, there is a practice that they are served a meal that is called Seudas Havra'ah, a condolence meal. And the reason for this is that they should be served a meal by others as a way of physically having others envelop them, care for them. We are taking care of you. You are not alone. The role that the community plays within the Shiva process is a primary aspect of this experience, and it starts at the very first moment when the mourners enter the house and we say to them, sit down, we're going to take care of you. We're going to feed you. We're going to envelop you with our love and our care, our concern, and our support. There's a custom to serve a round food at this meal. In many places, the custom is hard-boiled eggs, not exactly round oval. In other places, it's other round foods. Reminds us of the cycle of life that I mentioned before, that death is one part of the cycle, but there is spiritual life after death, and there will be physical and spiritual life later with the resurrection of the dead Trias Amesim in the future. This meal should only be served to the mourners. The mourners themselves are not supposed to eat in a large group that would require a zimun, benching together and praising God's names publicly. Each of the mourners should eat a little bit on their own. And here's the point, and this is a really important point. Shiva is not a party. Others should not be eating. It is not the right thing. I know it is widespread for people to cater and bring in large meals, and everyone comes after the funeral, and everyone comes and there's a big meal. It's not right, because that's not the mood. It is not a party. It is not the right thing. for anyone other than the mourner sitting Shiva to eat. It's one thing if someone has come from out of town and in the kitchen you want to have a sandwich and a drink so that they're actually hungry before they go back to the airport. That's one thing. But to have people sitting down and eating and drinking, it is widespread and it is not right. In a Shiva house, and again, not only the place where people are coming to visit, but each of the mourners, wherever they are at any of the hours during the Shiva period, we have the practice to cover the mirrors. And we cover the mirrors to de-emphasize personal grooming and vanity. That's not what our focus should be. We also do it because hopefully we're going to be holding a minyan. And in prayer services, we don't ever want to be facing a mirror, which would give the impression, God forbid, that we're praying to ourselves. So we don't ever want to have a mirror or anything reflective in front of us when we're praying anywhere. And that's a second reason to cover the mirrors. There is a practice, again, not widely observed, but important, and that is, in a Shiva house, we do not offer normal greetings. We don't say hello, how are you, have a good day. We have an alternative greeting to the mourner. The words Hamakom Yenachem Oscha B'soch Shar Avelei Tzion V'Yerushalayim, may God comfort you among the other mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. That's what we should say to the mourner when we come or when we leave. We can say that to each other as well. That is the same greeting and practice that exists on Tisha B'Av. When Tisha B'Av, we are all Avelei Tzion, we are all the mourners of Zion. And if you remember on Tisha B'Av, we did not offer good morning, hello, have a great day. It's awkward because it's an interruption of normal social interaction. And that awkwardness is one of the goals we are trying to achieve. Confront the loss. Don't try to deny it or run away from it, but confront it in a structured, supportive environment. And we will see more about this the next time. My friends, today I do wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you all soon in person.